All righty. I think everybody, at least it's 7 on my smartphone, which I trust more than the antique clocks on the walls. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight for our candidates forum. It's not that typical for us to have one in the fall, but we have an important special election on November 2nd. I know it's not the first thing town folks think about. We have our elections in May, and when there's, not a presidential governor's race in town, we may not pay attention. So it's important to remind your friends and neighbors that this election's coming up in less than 2 weeks. Now, Anderson Cooper couldn't be here tonight, so I've been chosen to moderate the 4th debate of the season, the first selectman. I'm Richard Fly, your town moderator, and I'm pleased that we have with us tonight 2 gentlemen who've made that important choice to serve their town, Tom Frayne and Ken Troop. So what we'll do is we'll give each of them 3 to 5 minutes to give you an opening statement, tell you a little bit about themselves. Then we'll open it up for questions, and that will drive the rest of our program, and then they'll each have a couple of minutes to sum up at the end. So, and this is all being taped for Bolton Access Television, and will run at least for the next 2 weeks. So anybody who missed this, you can tell them what a great discussion it was and how much you learned about the candidates tonight, and encourage them to find the forum on their local access channel.
It's also available on the internet.
It's also available. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 21st century. All right, so we did flip a coin beforehand, and Tom elected to go last. So Ken, you can open up.
Okay, thank you. Richard, thank you. First of all, I think as far as some personal background is concerned, I'm a 40-year resident of Meadow Road. Brenda, who's over there, and I raised 3 daughters there. They all went through the Emerson and Neshoba school systems, and we were quite happy about that. I worked in the transportation analysis field and still do some consulting in that. I'm also very much involved in music, and I'm in the Concord Band. We play out at Fruitlands, have played actually twice in Bolton at various celebrations, one for this building before it expanded, but played here. And then I sing in some area choruses, including Harvard Pro Musica and the Neshoba Valley Chorale. The reason that I want to be the selectman, though, is because I understand the issues, and I think I'm in a unique position to provide some stability right now. The controversies that we had at the town meeting surrounding that, and that included Larry Delaney's resignation, that in the aftermath of that, we need to work together to solve problems for the town. The 117 problem, certainly, but also the other things going on or that could be going on in the town, including growth and development, the schools, town services, and how they can best be provided with the money that the taxpayers put forward. And I think the town needs somebody that already has experience working relationships and respect of citizens and town officials alike. And I have that experience and respect. As you might know, I've served 2 sets of terms as a selectman, and that involved me in almost all the different aspects of town government. Couple that I would mention before we get into questioning would include town planning. There were several agricultural preservation restrictions that I played a major role in assuring were approved at the state level. I was involved in the master plan that was done in the mid-2000s, was responsible for some of the planning and management related to the municipal sewage treatment plant that serves the schools, this building, this public safety building, and the Houghton building. And the one that I guess I'm probably most proud of all the stuff I've done during that year is the continuous leadership role in the cadet EMT program at the high school that serves both the high school and the town of Bolton and the ambulance squad. I retired as a selectman in 2010, and since then I've been involved in a few other things in the town in leadership capacity, the principal one being, I guess, that I took over right after retiring as the president of Bolton Access TV. And because of that role, I ended up heading the Cable Advisory Committee, which was a town committee that ended up negotiating the Comcast license. I'm on the Town Commons Steering Committee, and I was very happy to come back from vacation and see that they're working on the remediation, that there's a building under construction at the top of that. And then I was also a member of the Village Overlay Task Force, and that was a group that formed after the defeat of an article, pulled a bunch of people together, came up with an article, and I ended up making the presentation at town meeting where that succeeded. So those are just a few things, and we can certainly discuss that further in the questions. I appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions, and if I'm elected, I'll continue to serve the town the way that I have in the past, with a collaborative style that has worked well for me up to this point. Tom.
All right. Tom.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Tom Frayne, and I'm running for selectman. I grew up in Bolton. I'm one of 7 children who grew up on Ballville Road, attended the Neshoba Public Schools in Emerson. Following high school, I worked in financial services for a total of about 10 years, both as a bond trader and money market trader, and also as an attorney for the Boston Stock Exchange. Since 1999, I've had a law practice here in Bolton that focuses on various things, things affecting families, companies, small companies. And that practice has grown from just me in 1999 to now over, with part-time and bookkeepers and things, 7 people. So it's been very successful, and the town has been good to me in terms of supporting it. The people that I grew up with and their parents supported me right at the inception of my business. And I lived here in the early, like 2000 to 2002, and served on the Bolton Senior Housing Corporation and the Bolton Housing Authority. And I got married a little late, but we moved back here in 2013. We have Michelle, my wife, is here with me, and we have 2 small boys. So the reason I'm running, what initiated, politics has always been something that I've been very, very, very interested in. It was something that was held out to be important in my family growing up. My father made sure nearly every dinner conversation, part of it was talking about politics, the need for it, the need for transparency and honesty, of public discourse, of civility, but participating and speaking out if you didn't like what was going on. And to be quite candid, when I moved back from Bolton, that was the farthest thing from my mind that I would kind of be here running for selectman. But the events of last spring with Main Street really drew me in. I felt strongly that the way that the proposed petition to transfer Main Street to the state was very, very lacking in transparency, and that bothers me. I feel like in public life, especially a small town, although not as small as it was when I grew up, then it was probably 1,000 to 2,000 people. Now it's 5,000 people. I don't know what the budget was then, but now it's $22 million. The high school, the district budget is $54 million a year. So we're small in numbers in a way, but we are spending a lot of money. And I think that transparency is a key part of that. It's a key part of the way the town is operated. It's a key part. Civility and transparency is a really important part of the town operations, and if it doesn't, then everything starts, the wheels start to fall off a little bit, which I feel that it did in the spring. In any event, that's what drew me into this, and since then I have become very involved as much as I can as an unelected person in coming up to speed on what being a member of town meeting means. And town meeting is really important. It's the legislature for the town. We have a lot of say. And the selectmen actually have a minority piece of the authority in running the town. Nearly everything is relegated to town meeting. Town meeting, you can bring a special town meeting, you can speak up, you can criticize, you can bring articles before the town, so that's really, really, really important. But I don't think you're going to get a vibrant participation in town meeting unless there's civility, and quite honestly, unless there's a new, fresh, independent person involved at the Board of Selectmen level. I think that that will be really, really helpful to the town. It will be somebody new, it will be somebody who's, I'm not afraid to speak out, I'm not afraid to have discussions. I make my living as a lawyer. 98%, probably 98.5% of all cases settle. And the reason they settle is because the lawyers build a consensus, they come to an agreement, and they work it out. And I believe that I can bring that to the Board of Selectmen and the town, as well as the critical analysis that's needed to where we are. Spending $23 million a year, non-school spending, we spend almost 25%, $2 million a year on debt service. There's a $54 million liability, unfunded, meaning we owe it through the school district for the retirement, the health care benefits of the school retirees. There's unfunded and unpaid health care expenses for the town employees. So this has really grown, it's really expanded. I feel that my professional experience, my long history with the town, I see many people in this room, or at least some of the people in the room tonight, that I remember from the time I was 10 years old. So I think I would make a very good selectman, maybe an excellent selectman. I'll certainly work very hard, and I'll bring the same passion to that job and the obligations of that job, which are civility, which are consensus building, but which are sticking up for the town meeting members and the taxpayers, and making sure there's transparency and civility and information about all of our decisions are forthcoming, so that we can all feel better about the way the town is operated.
All right, thanks. Well, you've heard from the two candidates, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I've got a couple of questions if people aren't ready, but if you're ready, raise your hand and ask your question. Or think about your question while I ask a question. But this ain't going to tell you how it works. I'm not going to be up here. I'm not Anderson Cooper. In this case, the audience gets to ask the question. So if you didn't come with a question, then, go ahead, because I'd just soon start with the audience.
How do you do? I'm really interested Warner Road. I'm really interested in how each of you would operate in the select board's or day-to-day operations. We do have a lot of important issues here. And what I think I'd like to do is to give a scenario and ask you how you each deal with that. So if you believed really strongly in an issue, but the other two members of the board disagreed with you, how would you proceed?
Jump in, whoever wants to go.
I don't want to.
Go ahead.
I think that to some degree what's lacking now in my observation of the selectmen's meetings is that there seems to be very little back and forth and discussion, and maybe that's because the members all agree. But I think it would be very helpful not only to the selectmen but to the town meeting, to the taxpayers, to understand why decisions are being, how they're being arrived at. And you know, if you look on the website and at the Board of Selectmen, you know, they gives rules of civility and discourse and the importance of it. I believe Robert's Rules of Order are in effect for the selectmen. There's strict procedure about how that discourse goes. But I think you do the best you can. You know, it's a process. It's like any other legislative process. The Board of Selectmen are essentially the executive branch of the town government. And the town meeting is the legislature. We don't have two branches, we have one. So you try to build a consensus and try to persuade and try to, you know, educate the town meeting and the taxpayers as much as you can. And I think if you do that, and if there is transparency and there's interest by the town citizens, then I think, you know, that the will of town meeting is gonna come out of the Board of Selectmen. If there isn't transparency, and there isn't civility, and there isn't consensus building, then it's not. And you're gonna have a disconnect, which I believe is in effect now. And I think we see that, you know, in the way the decision on outsourcing the dispatcher's job, the Main Street. And I believe, you know, with how the chief of police, it's proposed that decision be made. That's proposed essentially being outsourced also. And I think it's okay to have disagreement, and it's okay to have discourse and argument. It's not okay to be uncivil. But if you don't see that, I mean, we're blessed to have a TV station. So if you don't make the meeting, you can see it. You don't even have to rely on minutes. You just make your own decision remotely. So I think that's an important part of it, but the discussion is an important part of it. You can't show up at a meeting and have the decision already made because it's robbing the electorate of their right. And that's...
Ken?
My experience is that decisions usually are made at the meetings, and that there is discussions. There have been many times when there have been things that one or the other of the people hasn't agreed with. Now, it depends in part on the composition of the board. There were times during my career when the selectmen tended to agree with each other most of the time. There were some times when there was one or another who didn't. They definitely talk it out, but I believe that it has been done civilly, and I certainly have done that many times. I guess I would tell you one anecdote of of sort of being in the middle, if you will, and it relates remotely, at least, to the point about the police chief selection. Although there was a lengthy evaluation process that went on of all the finalists for the job to replace Chief Wilson after his 35 years on the job, it came down to two finalists, and it was the job of the selectmen, because they're the appointing official and the deciding official, to make that selection. And so we had interviewed each of the people, we talked about it amongst ourselves and all that. When it came down to it, the person on my left was in favor of one of the persons. The person on my right was in favor of the other one. I happened to sit in the middle at the time. And so basically it was my decision. But we talked it out, and we finally made it. But the other thing I would say about how we would proceed with these things is that once a decision is made, then I support whatever that is, however much I might have disagreed with it. And there's an example that Chief Wilson himself used to cite about that, where the town meeting, over the objection of the selectmen years ago, passed adding a person in a so-called highway safety unit that publicly was viewed as being paid for by more traffic fines, by generating additional revenue. And we got a reputation around the country and on a website of being a place where you shouldn't go because of all that. And those of us on the selectmen really thought it was a bad idea, but the chief won the day. And one of the things that it needed was to get a home rule petition at the legislature to approve being able to do that. And so I went with the chief to the hearing at the State House and testified in favor of the bill. He was sort of flabbergasted that I would do that. Well, that was my job to do it because I had disagreed with it, we talked about it, but then I supported it. So it happens, and my experience has been that boards are able to work things out without bloodshed.
Right? Another question? There.
Hi, and David Wiley, Green Road. In my 30 years in Bolton, it seems like it's been one long struggle about whether the town is for sale or not. And that certainly was part of the Main Street battle last year, when I think that the town administrator and the selectmen decided essentially to sell Main Street for the maintenance cost. And I have to hand it to Tom as being a leader in the fight against that. My memory goes way, way back though, and I have to credit Ken with a lot of victories in preserving Bolton. The biggest one that comes to mind is the winery. The winery, as some of you might know, would be development of McMansions today. But the state, with a great battle, came up with about 2/3 of the cost of an agricultural preservation restriction. And I think Ken was a leader in getting the town to come up with the town's share of that agricultural preservation restriction, and that made it possible to continue the winery, and it's Bolton's gem today. And Ken was active as well in getting APRs for the Shartner Farm and the Neesway Farm. So those are all very important, and they go over a number of years, and one could go on all evening about them. But my question is for both candidates: can we count on you, and to what degree, to carry on the battle to preserve Bolton, because it'll always be for sale, and there'll always be a lot of money to be made for selling out our most precious heritage.
Ken, you want to take this one?
Sure. And my answer would be sure also. Let me expand a little bit on what you mentioned about the APR, because it's true that the town had to come up with its share, and so the selectmen sponsored the article and advocated for that at town meeting. But actually, we had to lobby the state, and the committee that ended up approving or not approving that APR was having a big meeting at the Big E in West Springfield on a particular afternoon. And it was not at all clear that they were going to approve it, because Bolton really wasn't rural enough, and we were a little too far east for the agricultural interests on that committee, and even the winery was considered to be small from the point of view of what people wanted for that sort of thing. And so Pat Walrath and I, who was our state rep at the time, took a trip out to West Springfield that afternoon to attend that meeting and to talk with those people about getting that, and they ended up approving it, partly because they did that. So yes, I'm very committed to preserving the town. One of the things that's occurred to me in the last few years, really in seeing how things have changed with now the work of the Common, some of the issues that have come up about the traffic on 117 and other things, that the master plan that we worked on was completed in 2006. Now, in some respects, that wasn't that long ago, but that was almost 10 years ago, and quite a bit has happened, and it might make sense if we were to update that. And a good part of a master plan is to roll into it the open space protection work that the Conservation Commission does in working through that. And so that might be something that would make some sense. I think the Common to me is a way of preserving the town and actually improving the center of town. And thank goodness for the trust stepping forward to do that. And I think the private work that's going on there is underappreciated by the town. And it really is is saving the town a tremendous amount of money and getting out of the hands of the town the considerable expense of the cleanup of that property. So that's another thing that I think is a good thing. I thought I had something else I wanted to mention on that. No, I'll really stop there, but certainly preservation is very high on my list of things that I would continue to try to do as a selectman.
Tom?
I mean, you can count on me, and if you doubt that at all, just start replaying the town meeting tapes from the spring. And also, you know, regrettably, in many ways, that we had to file suit to stop that transfer. The first meeting was in April of the spring, and there was 50 or 60 people there, and when have you ever heard of 50 or 60 people agreeing, much less at one time, one meeting? You know, trying to work that out with the selectmen, not to petition without town meeting authorization and a big discussion, and Main Street and non-Main Street citizens alike, and I was one of them, opposed that transfer, and I think that's important, and I think it's important to carry through. Not only to preserve the town's rural character, but also, you know, in many ways, the Main Street is the soul of the town, and it embraces and it wraps its arms around our churches, our library, to the extent we have commercial services, that's a part of it, and I think it's really important to commit to that and get a line item in there, plan for it and budget for it. Bolton, you know, this from my earliest recollection as a child here is that, you know, there's great resistance to making this a suburb, you know, keeping its rural character, and I think I'm 100% committed to it, and I think everybody is. But I also think we have 23,000 cars a day go down Main Street. What are we going to do about that? I do think we need services, you know, in a very limited way. There are some commercial properties in Bolton. There's the Cracker Barrel, there's Mr. Whistle's old shop, and there's the Salt Box. And it would be nice if we could walk around and enjoy those properties, and it would be nice for older people to be able to age in place in Bolton. When the Main Street thing kicked up, the Bings were leaving, and he said, we can't drive, so we can't stay in Bolton. That's a shame. And I think so we have to stay committed to that, hopefully budget for it. But no, absolutely I'm committed to it, and there should be no doubt in anyone's mind, there should be no doubt about the other people who are involved in that suit, because we all paid. We had to pay money for that, quite a bit of money. So it shows an enormous commitment to the town, to keeping it rural, keeping it manageable. And on my campaign website, on frameforselectmen.com, Jonathan Keep provided me with an article from the New York Times about a town in upstate New York facing exactly this issue. Strained finances, too much traffic, the traffic robbing the rural character of the town, and what they did about it. And it's a terrific story, and it's not necessarily requires money. It just requires decision on the Board of Selectmen. So I do think we need to fight to keep it that way. You know, but I agree with Mr. Wiley that the building lots are $150,000 a piece. You know, back 2004, 2005, go up to Oak Trail, and if I'm not mistaken, they were $450,000 a lot. This has become, you know, it's a town where people of means go to, and I think that cuts both ways. And but no, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind about where I stand on that.
All right, so since 117 has come up, you know, clearly there was a lot of opposition at town meeting. I remember that very well. You know, the state's said it's no longer interested, but the traffic and road issues aren't going away. So I'd be interested to know what each of you thinks the next steps are. You know, preserving the rural character of the town is great, but as you said, with 23,000 cars going through the middle of town at peak hours each day, It's a big issue for a lot of people, including, people on Main Street who have to put up with the trucks and whatnot. So asking both of you, what you think would be the, how you would proceed with this going forward.
Sorry if I take that one. Sorry if I go first.
Please.
Yeah. So again, I would refer everyone. Not to be self-serving, but frameforselectmen.com and click on that article and under Hope for Main Street, and read that. They did very simple things to slow traffic, calm traffic. And when they calm traffic, it's like taking down a dam. The natural habitat just crawls in, and it did there, and I think it will here too. I also think, we're spending 21 plus million a year. $2 million a year of that is debt service, which is going to roll off in the next approximately 8 years. I think we need to unshackle the Main Street Committee. The Main Street Committee that was formed as a result of the discord on Main Street has ridiculous restrictions on it. Since 1972, there's at least 4 major citizen studies that have been done that are beautiful, really thoughtful, really smart people have written these studies and made great suggestions about how Main Street could be improved. Some of them require money, some of them don't. But if we were to plan for that day down the road when the $2 million a year, $2 million out of $8 million in non-school expenditures, so it's a huge chunk of money. Some of that should come back to the taxpayers, but some of it should go to Main Street and other public infrastructure, which is going to support all of us. But if we use that money to support the infrastructure that's here, to give people relief who have failed septic systems and really small lots, the expense of fixing the septic systems are really onerous. If you read investment stuff, still the number one thing when you retire, if you have money or not, is have you paid off your house? And how can people pay off their house when they're going to have to put in a $50,000 septic system? I think the Economic Development Committee is rolling out those ideas and hopefully plans to give people that relief. I think we need sidewalks. We have an incredible history in this town. It is incredible. Read the Whitcomb book on Bolton about the role it played in abolition and running up to the Civil War. All the people that lived here and walked here, and it's beautiful. And there must be, there's just so much history. So I also think that we, Lancaster and Bolton, are subsidizing the Department of Transportation because they have a problem with Route 2. And they rather than fix Route 2, rather than do something about public transportation, they're letting people get off at 190, not letting people, forcing people off at 190 and 70, coming down to 117 to 495 South so they can get to the Pike. We're subsidizing them. So I think we should have no compunction whatsoever about doing the easy steps that are in that article. Calming traffic, we should put in a Jake break bylaw. We should quiet things. We should take back, it's our town. We pay the taxes. Why shouldn't we be able to enjoy 6 miles of it? And that's what I would be doing in addition to unshackling the Main Street Committee, letting those people like Mary and Kia and Donna Beniotti and all the people who are so knowledgeable about Main Street and public safety make recommendations. Let them make recommendations. Let's get estimates of what it would cost. Sudbury does the same thing, and they budget $100,000 a year for sidewalk expansion. I mean, we have $2 million in debt service that's rolling off, and I'll be the first one to agree that we need tax relief if we can get it. And there's a lot of competition for that $2 million. Make no mistake about it. But I think it could work, and I think it would really improve it for all of us who own property here, which is everybody. We'd all benefit, and it would be a nicer town.
All right, Ken?
That's a lot of stuff. I think it's a little more complicated to actually deal with the improvements than than being able to do something like traffic calming, but there's certainly nothing wrong with looking at that. The way that I look at the committee is that it's a committee that's been set up, and to me, the thing that's needed most right now is what's the first thing that ought to be done? And there's enough information out there that I think they can figure that out. And really, the sooner we get a program going, the better we are about it, because we know that it takes a while to do any of these things, whether the town pays for it in its entirety or whether it has help from the state or the feds or whoever it is. It takes a while to do the work. So it seems to me getting out there and identifying the projects that you want to work on in some sort of priority order makes a lot of sense. My experience as a consultant, particularly in the transportation field, is that when you get to the end of a project, part of your recommendation are going to be next steps. And so I'm not really worried about whether or not they're restrained or not restrained in looking at some of the reports. There is a lot of useful information out there. And I think it's a matter just of sorting through that and helping to decide what the first thing that needs to be worked on is, and then sort of going from there. Now, we didn't turn it over to the state, and that's fine. Two things, we have to continue to work with them because it is Route 117. It's not just Main Street. So we have to follow some rules that the state has, and that's going to constrain what we're able to do. So that's part of it. And I've forgotten what the other thing I was going to mention on it is, but anyway, that we're going to have to figure out how to pay for whatever work it is that's going to need to get done. There are state programs. There's the program where the Federal Highway Administration provides money to the states that goes through the metropolitan planning organizations, which in our case is the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is good news and bad news. That's the big one, but that's the one that covers Boston and all those guys. And so we can become part of that and may or may not be able to tap into that source of money, but we really have to figure out what we need to do. So for the moment, but let me mention one thing though,
Right.
that from what Tom was saying earlier, he said they had to file suit. It doesn't seem to me that it was necessary to file suit. It seems to me that just as our earlier question was about how do the selectmen work things out, that there ought to be a way for citizens to work things out with the town government. And it seems to me from where I sat, because I tried unsuccessfully throughout that whole process to work as a facilitator or intermediary between the various groups. And I still don't understand why it was determined that it was necessary to sue. Because it seems to me that what that did was to create a divide that really couldn't be crossed. And it foreclosed the opportunity to have the dialogue and to reach the consensus that needed to be reached. And so to me, that wasn't a good idea. I tried to find ways to bring the parties together, but they either felt they couldn't because the lawsuit was there, or they didn't want to because the lawsuit was there. And so I think that was an unfortunate thing from my point of view that really didn't help in the whole process of 117. But we need to work together on it, and I would let the committee do what it needs to do. They'll be able to come forward with recommendations of other things that ought to be studied, of further things that ought to be done, of cost studies that ought to occur. The idea of doing sidewalks is fine. When we've looked at it in the past, we have a lot of complications, especially down at the west end of town, with where the easements are. And so it's not a trivial process to simply say, oh, let's put a sidewalk from Pondside to the high school. Because if you have ever gone on that area, there's more room on one side than the other. And then it'll change and there'll be room on that side. And so So there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done to try to figure that out. One of the reports that I believe the group has to work with is from the Mobility Committee, and some things that they did to look at walking and bicycling in the town. I worked with the group on that in reviewing their report and spent an afternoon with them talking about some of the details in that. That should certainly be considered by the committee and be one of the things that ends up being pursued and brought forward.
Okay,
Can I respond?
sure. Short.
So I think regarding the lawsuit, I think it's important for everyone to know, that, it's really hard to get 50, 60, 70 people to agree, but they did in that case. And the reason they agreed is because there was multiple efforts, multiple attempts to go to the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator to work out that issue. And in this country, under the Constitution, when you have a dispute and you just can't agree, you go to court. And I'll be the first one. I have 21 years as an attorney. I'll be the first one to tell you, I tell every single client, avoid it at all costs. It's not a place you want to end up because you lose the right to work out the problem on your own. But people felt like they had no choice. And I would just, on the issue of the studies, look at the restrictions on that committee. All they're allowed to do is review 3 studies that have already been done multiple times and then go to gather dust. They need to be empowered to make a decision and make recommendations. And there's plenty of people. What I learned with the Main Street thing is we are blessed with an incredibly rich, experienced, wise, articulate group of citizens. Every single one of us has so much to offer, and I think it's important to include them in that process. But to shackle that committee is a mistake.
All right. Terry?
Okay, so I'm gonna just change the discussion. I'm Terry Abdalian, Vaughn Hill Road, co-president of Friends of Bolton Seniors. So I just wanted to change the discussion. Maybe one of the things you said, we're a diverse town, we have lots of interests. 20% of our town are seniors, age 60 and over. I don't know the exact amount of the budget, but it is minuscule what's being spent on seniors in the town. Some of the things that you've just discussed about sidewalks, and being able to stay in town, these are all very important things to seniors. A place to meet, a place to congregate that can serve us, and I am a senior too, I'm proud to say that, can serve us is something else of importance. So my question is, because it's often overlooked, this large group of people, 20% of the population, are often overlooked. What are your plans that might equal or make it more fair the amount of taxes that go to senior activities versus what benefits they're getting? Because seniors pay taxes at the same rate as everybody else, don't participate in a lot of what the taxes go to. So that's my question.
All right, Ken, I think you got this first.
First of all, I guess I don't think it ought to be done by percentages of the budget or by numbers. So I mean, I don't think you can look at the amount that's spent on any particular function or group and say that that's unfair compared with some other one. That said, right now, from my vantage point at least, we have a functional senior center at the senior housing complex, and I think it was a good thing when we were able to work to get the 3rd day down there. Now, if that isn't inadequate, then we should certainly look at something else. One of the things that strikes me that isn't just related to seniors is that I think it would be a good thing for the town if we had some sort of community center. And I'm broadening that beyond just the seniors. One of the things that they have in Canada, associated in many cases with the fire departments of the small towns that are there, are fire halls. And essentially what it is a community center. It's a building, it's mainly an open room, it has a kitchen, it may have a stage, and it can be used for whatever purpose by whoever it is that needs to use that. We don't have that sort of thing, and certainly one of the drawbacks of the senior center is the fact that it's locked all the time, that it isn't of use to people who don't live there at other times of the day than the 3 days that it's open. And we don't really have any place like that. So it would be nice if we could find something like that. And I was thinking when we were having a discussion of vacant business properties, of wouldn't it be nice if the Skinner property were turned into that sort of thing. Now I'm told by some people that the condition of the building is not good, and maybe that's true, but it's an example of something. Now the downside of that, of course, is you take a piece of business property that's paying taxes and put it in on the municipal side, and then you've hurt us in that direction as well. But that's certainly something that I think would be a good thing, and it would be a good thing both from the point of view of the seniors that would use it, of other age groups that might use it, but it might actually be someplace that could be more of a gathering space. And I know we've talked of gathering spaces at the Common, we've talked of gathering spaces when this room was built, and it sort of is, but it sort of isn't. But all of that unfortunately costs money, and whether it's the little part of the seniors or the big part of the schools, it still costs money to do any of that sort of thing. And unless you were to find a vacant property like Skinner's or something, then you've got the whole problem of finding a piece of land and then being able to build it, and then how you pay for that. And so it definitely becomes a problem there. Maybe what we ought to figure out is a way to better use the school buildings. And that's problematic in itself, but maybe there is some way that they could be used at times when they're not in session or something, so that seniors could use that, or so that groups could gather at various places. It's certainly worth pursuing some of that.
Tom?
I think from a big picture standpoint, one critical thing that seniors need, they need tax relief. Because as people age, unless you're fortunate enough to have a savings and some type of investment portfolio, a lot of people rely a lot on the entitlements, and that is just not doing it anymore. There's no cost of living increases. There's really been a huge, in fact this year there's zero. So, and meanwhile, thank the good Lord, oil prices have fallen, but I mean, we have a very regressive situation here. We have real estate taxes with no break for elderly people, and it's really, really, really regressive. They don't have their taxable income situation is not affected by anything. It's a wealth tax. It's a simple, highly regressive tax. I think one thing that needs to be done as a town, and we're not the only ones facing this situation, but as a town, we need to let our state rep and our state senator know that the aid to cities and towns has got to increase. Because to the people who are earning money and they're paying taxes anyway, it's indifferent to me whether I pay it to the town of Bolton or to the state or to the federal government. It's indifferent to me. But to a person who's retired and living on Social Security, the only taxes they may be paying, or the huge chunk of taxes that they're paying, are the real estate taxes. So if you had aid to cities and towns increase, the amount of property taxes being paid, especially by the elderly, will decrease. People who are working wouldn't feel it, and that's a systemic and structural problem with the state budget that they're taking no action against. I think that as the population ages, and I'm sure you've all seen the demographic studies in the papers about whether do we build a new high school or not. We are, like it or not, we need to do two things as a town at least. is to keep the investment in public infrastructure going. If they don't, and the demographic outcome described in the newspaper continues, people are going to move east to the towns that do provide the public infrastructure, that do provide the elderly services, that do provide walkability. And we need to do that. We're vying for older people. We want them to stay, not only for diversity, but for what they bring to the table in terms of experience. But also we want them to stay and pay taxes. And we want them, we want to make it easy as possible. But you need a walkable town. You need to support the commercial space that's available here. As I mentioned earlier about the economic development, it would be really nice to be able to buy a cup of coffee in the town. And it would be really nice to congregate in the town. And you need, to some degree, you need commercial services, and you need a place to buy a bottle of milk, and you need to, otherwise you're just going to pack up and go. And if there's no younger people, or fewer younger people, when I grew up on Ballville Road, there was 36 kids that all along, amongst in the same age group. And now it seems like, just anecdotally to me, I don't see that anymore. The neighborhoods are smaller, the families are smaller. How are we going to address that? We need to get ahead of it. And it is money driven. But if you don't do it, and I think there is the money there, if we explain it to people. But one thing we can't do anymore, we can't raise property taxes. I mean, if the town meeting told us anything in the spring, it's that people are fed up. And if you looked at the Tri-Town meeting, Jennifer Leone from the Selectmen said that there was 100 people in Lancaster that were behind on their taxes and had some type of lien or threatened lien against them. And they felt if they raised the property tax rate any more, that would push those people into foreclosure situations, which would rob the town of revenue. So I think we need to be committed to the elderly. I think there is the money to do it. We just need to explain it to the town meeting. But I'm right there with you. So.
Susan, do I have to stand up? Susan Mason, Berlin Road. I'd like to correct something that you said, Tom. There are a number of different programs available, both with the town of Bolton and the state of Massachusetts, for property tax relief for seniors. There is, depending on one's income, there are several programs within the town itself. There's the called Circuit Breaker through the state. And there's a STREP, the Senior Tax Relief Program, where you can volunteer and work hours in town hall, at the senior center, at other places, the library, and the value of those hours, $8 an hour, I believe it is right now, goes towards reduction in your property taxes as a senior.
Okay.
And that's 62 and over? Is that the?
Well, 60 is the
60.
60 and over qualifies you as a senior. Some of these different.
The programs
property
vary,
tax
like
programs
the
can
Circuit Breaker, I think you have to be 65, but some of the others are 60 or 62.
Patty?
Panny Gurk, you don't want me to use that.
Yeah, because she's going to get.
It's Panny Gurk on Woodside Drive.
Okay, everybody turn your volume down
Okay.
right now.
I won't. I want to go back to I'd like to know your thinking on the lawsuit a little more clearly. I understand that after town meeting voted and you continued your lawsuit against the selectmen, do you think this is an appropriate way of discussing with boards, all boards, or just the selectmen? Would you consider suing the planning board if it came up with something that they didn't do what you thought was appropriate, or a number of people didn't? Do you think using a lawsuit is the appropriate manner to influence town government?
Well, again, this was a step that was taken after repeated efforts were made to resolve what was being presented as a petition to transfer Main Street to the state. The lawsuit actually was not about Main Street. The lawsuit was because Chapter 40 governs the operation of cities and towns. So if you want to know the rules of If you want to know the playbook for cities and towns, you go to Chapter 40. Chapter 40 requires, before land is transferred by a town, the town meeting authorize that by a 2/3 margin. That's what the lawsuit was about. It was about taking people's right to vote. If Main Street was voted on by town meeting, and town meeting by a 2/3 margin voted to transfer it to the state, I'd be all right with that. I would very much disagree with it. I would have voted against it, but I would be all right with that because you would have had the transparency. You would have had an opportunity to be heard, and town meeting is the legislature for the town. And that's where the power is vested, not in a board of selectmen. That's incorrect. If you look at Article 7 of the warrant, Article 7 or Article 8 was the town meeting, the Main Street transfer issue. Go to Article 21, which was, Article 21, which was about also transferring land. That abided by Chapter 40 to the T. Why didn't Article 7? And that's what people were complaining about. 21 people joined together to file suit and pay legal fees because they felt that their property was threatened. And do I think, so what your question was, do I think that's the
Appropriate way to deal with boards in general, and would you consider suing whatever the circumstance, whether a planning board or the assessors or whoever, whatever.
Me personally?
Well, just in general.
Do I think it's a good idea? Is that what you're asking me? Do I think it's a good idea to
Do
sue?
you think it's an appropriate way to solve the issues?
I think we're Americans. And it's the United States Constitution and the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, and that's we're a nation of laws and you follow the law. And that's an option under the law. Do I think it's should be done lightly? Absolutely not. But it wasn't done lightly in this case. The town administrator started discussing transfer of Main Street to the state in August of 2013. I never received a letter. I live right next to the town hall. I never received a letter. I never received any type of certified letter, notice, nothing. The way I found out about it is my wife and my sister went to a meeting in January of this year, 18 months after that discussion was started, and found out that a decision had been made that the selectmen were petitioning. And that was the first we got notice of it. When my neighbor is having her septic done, I got a certified letter saying, your neighbor's having her septic done. Here's 2 dates there's going to be meetings so that you can be heard. I didn't get that with the Main Street transfer. I heard about it in January of 2015. To be honest, I really didn't pay that much attention to it. It just grew and grew and grew. And when I went to the first meeting in April, 60 people were there, and they all agreed to move forward. But in fairness, the suit was dismissed by agreement between the town and the plaintiffs, the 21 plaintiffs, approximately a few weeks later. So.
Okay. All right. Art, you had your hand up? Martha, did you want to ask a question?
Oh, I forgot what it was.
Okay. Well, you've got a pen and a piece of paper.
I didn't write it down.
Okay. Wayne?
Wayne, what's 42?
And I'll say, I don't mind if we go a little past, if you guys don't. But one or two more questions before we give them a chance to close. In the meantime, you guys need something to drink or a cookie or anything? Okay.
You can go longer than that as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Wayne Wetzel, 42 Harvard Road. Elaine and I moved to Bolton in 1971, so we've been around a long time. And I was fortunate enough to serve the town of Bolton in many capacities. One of my concerns is you talked about a committee on Main Street, and I don't want to make this just a single topic of conversations, but there's been all sorts of studies, one of which is a long-range planning study that I've worked on, and we brought forth the idea that the town and the school district, in its infinite stupidity, was offered land that ultimately became Fox Run, and so therefore the chance to expand Neshoba was forever adjacent land was forever taken away from us. But the Long Range Planning Committee said there was another parcel of land in that vicinity, and they may want to consider an eminent domain before, in fact, all the large parcels in Bolton get removed, and/or a building down on the eastern side of town might be taken over for a school. There was also a recommendation that we look at the land up in Bolton Flats, because there's some wells up there that it would be nice to be under the town's control so that we'd have good water forever. No actions were ever taken. So you talk about committees and you talk about empowering, but the move forward from some of these recommendations falls flat. I'm curious what you do to make some of these things happen, or dispose of them and say they were bad ideas and we don't want to consider them.
Ken, you're up.
Yeah, I was there for some of those. In fact, one of the ones down by the high school, or around the corner, just beyond the highway barn, we looked into as a possible town purchase, and it failed by 6 votes, I believe it was, which was too. And there are now, I think there's one house there now, and the possibility of more later on. You just sort of have to be persistent. You're never going to get all of those things. You're not going to win every single thing that's won. But I think if we go back to some of the studies that Wayne is talking about, and take a look at, I would say that there have been more victories than there have been defeats, if you want to go back to Dave's original question about preservation, that there's a lot that actually has occurred. But it takes a lot of effort, and sometimes once like the one at Fox Run, if that once something like that is gone, it's gone. There are other things that can be pursued, and you just kind of need to keep working at it. And I guess one of the good things about having a committee look at the old studies is so they don't reinvent the wheel, and so that they know and can make judgments about what was done, why it didn't, maybe why it didn't, or at least what lessons were learned from some of the previous studies or the previous failures. And that's really all that I can say is that we just need to stay with it and keep plugging, and to involve as many people in it as possible, and keep the citizenry informed of what those studies are and of what the pros and cons of them are, and unfortunately what the costs of them are, because the thing that we need to remember is that almost everything that we've talked about tonight costs money, including tax relief. And so it's, it's a balancing act, and we may or may not have balanced it correctly in the past. I don't know. I mean, you can say, I suppose, that we're relatively high in the taxes per capita or taxes per house or whatever, compared with a lot of other towns in the state. Maybe that's because we won more than we lost from a preservation point of view. I don't know. But I think it has created a quality of life that's better than it would have been if we hadn't done what we did over those years, and we really just need to keep working at that.
Tom?
I would say, I mean, the current Route 117 committee is case in point. The charter of that committee is so restrictive that it relegates it to the pile of studies that you're talking about, where you do this really good job, these incredibly smart, bright people, and town meeting and the selectmen are on equal footing. It's the two branches of government here in Bolton. Why? To be honest, why is the committee tolerating that? I think that it's not right. They need to do what they do best, which is write studies, which there are a lot of them. I mean, there's 3, 4, 5, anyway, going back 30 or 40 years. Some of the recommendations in those studies haven't been implemented. A lot of them just haven't been. And one thing that has to occur side by side with that committee is how are you going to pay for it? And but But that's why I focus on the debt as it rolls off. What's going to happen to that $2 million? How is that going to be spent? Is it going to be spent, in tax relief? But I think we need to dedicate some of it, half of it, I don't know what the right number is, to public infrastructure. If not, we're not going to be able to keep people and attract people, especially if that demographic study is right. But just listen to this. So this is right off the assessor's website. Since 2003, the valuation of the housing stock has gone from $811 million to almost $900 million. So that's about 11% over 13 years. But when you consider how many houses have been built in 13 years, I look quickly, there's like 100 building permits that have been issued. So my take on that is that your house is flat going back to 2003. The tax rate has gone up 65% in 13 years. And the amount we pay as a town has gone up 83%. So in 2003, we were paying $10 million a year. Now we're paying 19. So the two go side by side. I don't see us being able to tax our way out of this problem. I think we have to hold the line on spending as much as we can, be very suspect about big capital projects like a new high school. I mean, maybe it's required, maybe it isn't, but maybe we can get away with adding classrooms or the mobile classrooms or something less than a $100 or $200 million project. But I think you need to, the charter of that committee has to empower those members. They're smart people. The 117 committee, there's probably decades and decades and decades of experience in the town of Bolton, serving the town of Bolton on committees. They know what to do. Let them do it, but plan for it. And immediately we should have a discussion about paying for those recommendations.
All right, we're at 8:05. You guys, do you have someplace to be? Are you willing to?
No, let him go,
Are you-
let him go.
Are you worn out yet? You
No,
annoyed with
not
any
at
of these?
all.
Anybody you
No,
don't want to
let
hear
him
from? Just let me know. Dave, you've had your hand up for a while, so.
Dave Lindsay, Berlin Road. Tom has talked a fair amount about taxes. Ken, you briefly alluded to it in your last response. Could you expand a little more, Ken, on your thoughts regarding our high relative tax rate and high average tax bill compared to other cities and towns in the state?
It's certainly not an easy problem to solve. And before I really go into that, but it's sort of related to it, I wanted to comment on one thing that Tom mentioned earlier about being on an equal footing. I don't believe that the selectmen and the town meeting are on an equal footing. And the reason for that is because the town meeting approves the budget. They approve essentially everything. And really what the Board of Selectmen is the executive director, if you will. That yes, there's things that they do in terms of hiring and firing and all those sorts of things. But the town meeting, to my mind, is much more equal than the board is in terms of the power that it has. And because if the selectmen bring forward an article and the town meeting turns it down, then it doesn't happen. And really what the selectmen are there for is to carry out the wishes of town meeting as reflected in the articles that are passed. Now, yes, they certainly have powers, but I would not view them as being equal. And as far as taxes are concerned, again, everything we've talked about this evening costs money. And I don't know where the solution to that is. My experience from the many budgets over the years is that we're not fat, that on the municipal side in particular, the budgets are very tight. They're closely scrutinized, have been for years. I can't remember the last time that any department was told that they could ask for anything that they wanted. Almost always the guidance is level funded. Now, in some cases, there are special situations that the people bring forward. the condition of our roads and other infrastructure to the extent that we're not happy with it is because we haven't spent the money on it. We've chosen to not spend the money on it. DPW has a list on their board of roads and their condition and what it's likely to cost to fix them. Do they bring that forward every year or even in an overall plan to town meeting? No. And the reason that they don't is because by the time they get through the advisory committee and the selectmen and knowing what the overall situation is, then there isn't the money to spend that's there. And I don't really see a good solution to that. We've talked about the fact that the school budget is about 70%, so you could say that the solution is there, but are you really going to cut the schools enough to do that? And remembering that we're in a district, even if we were to have rejected the budget the way that we did this year, Lancaster and Stowe both passed it, so we really didn't have any choice. So it becomes a matter of working with the school committee, not to cut the budget so much as to make sure that what's being done in the school district makes sense from the point of view of the students, and that there is some way of if it's at all possible, balancing between the taxpayer needs and the school needs. I don't know that we'll ever get there, and so I don't really have a solution to it. And if I'm not aware of solutions that we have, except to just continue to be vigilant in the way that we analyze the budgets and in what gets presented to the town meeting. We have not had a general override since 2003 or 2002, I believe, and that's to the credit of, I think, of the people who have been in office and have been able to do what they have done in managing the budget. And the communications are improving between the towns and the school system, which is good. And so hopefully that will help in explaining that. So unfortunately, Dave, I don't have any more solutions to the tax problem than you do, except to do the best that the boards can in overseeing what spending is brought forward.
Tom?
Thank you. So, I think, going back to this assessor site, I think you have to ask yourself, since 2003, if you're whatever your investments are, whatever your net worth is, has stayed flat, and then the taxes are up by 65%, and what you're asked to pay is up 83%. Has your pay gone up by 83%? I just looked online before I got here. The median income in Massachusetts is flat in that time. And so what's the answer? What I do, just from being there at the town meeting in the spring, is that it's not to raise the tax rate. There's no appetite for it. And just what I said about Lancaster, they're our sister town. Those are people that are struggling if they're falling behind on their real estate taxes, and you fold in the elderly. It's a non-starter. I do think we can do a better job of holding the line. At the town meeting, somebody brought up the issue of a $5,000 or $15,000 phone system. And on a $22 million budget, that is not even a rounding error. But it's just like in your own home. And I think a town is somewhere between a home and a business. You do things in a town that simply don't make economic sense, but it's for the good of everyone. And I'm a beneficiary of the schools of this district. My teachers, that from Clara Mae Dickerson to the Delaney's to the Mrs. Mecklin, Dennis Bean, the entire English department at the high school changed my life. And we need to make sure that continues to stay true. But we also need to invest in public infrastructure. But I think to not reach out to the state legislature, you are helping Jennifer Flanagan, our senator, and Kate Hogan, our state rep, by vehemently demanding that we get relief to the cities and towns. You're helping them, because then they go to their boss, the Senate president and the speaker, and they say, listen, I'm getting pressure. And I'm not going to get reelected unless we get some relief. And that's where the relief's going to come from. It's going to come from the federal government and the state government, because we can't do it here. There's no other place to go. So I do think it really important, like with the school. There's a statement of interest that's going to be filed in January that we're interested perhaps in a new school. Detailed numbers were at the Tri-Town meeting last week. Minuteman wants a new school for 638 students. The price tag on that is $145 million, and that will be paid for by 16 cities and towns. So when I left Neshoba, there was 800 students. Now there's 1,200 students. So you need at least, for argument's sake, you're going to need a big school. So you're talking about $150, $200 million divided by, the 10 or 15,000 people in the district. That's going to be a serious hit on your taxes, and maybe we need it. But I think it requires vigilance, it requires town meeting participation, and really showing up and asking questions about all aspects of the budget, all of the aspects of the budget, even if it's a symbolic $15,000 phone systems, that you can wait, maybe wait a few years on that. And I think that's how we have to approach it, and we have to stick together, and otherwise it's not going to work.
Ken, you had one?
Yes. There is one thing that I thought of that we have done that I think does end up saving some money, and it's possible to look at other aspects of it also, which is the regionalization of dispatchers. I don't see that as outsourcing the dispatchers. What it really is doing is regionalizing. It's having Bolton folded into a larger dispatching operation that will end up saving the town money and provide better service at the same time. In that particular case, one of the driving factors of it was really the better service being provided, because there are new requirements I think they're actually at the federal level, having to do with emergency management dispatching. And what that means is that the dispatcher needs to have enough medical training, at least in his or her head, to be able to walk a person like one of us over the phone through certain medical procedures until help gets there. And it requires a lot of training, it requires a lot of certification, and it isn't necessarily something that individual dispatchers in Bolton have, although they could. Everybody who works at the regional center does. So by folding our system into them, their computers are going to know who's where and that sort of thing, the way the 911 works anyway. And they will have trained people, and we will save some money in the process. One of the things that over the years the Tri-Town meeting tried to do before it really got wound around school problems all the time was to talk amongst the three towns about things that the towns could do together in the way of sharing of stuff or services that could be regionalized. And unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of that they had. But whenever there's an opportunity to look at that, I think we should. And that could be a way that money could be saved, and, as in the case of this one, actually provide the service, better service than before.
All right, I'll take one more question and then let those guys. Martha?
Yes, sir. Martha Remington, Main Street. I just wanted to comment about something that Mr. Troop said about town meeting and the selectmen. Yes, we vote on articles at town meeting, and when the selectmen declare those articles non-binding, we are not treated fairly. Thank you.
Okay, question?
Can I just I'd like to clarify some inaccuracies or some.
Well, let's get some questions. We're not really at PolitiFact. I'm sure we'll cover it later. Yes.
So, just a quick question. Let's go back to the budget last year. Mark Ayotte, 985 Main Street. So, So let's go back to the budget last year, because that was a really interesting thing, only living here 16 years, not as much as many of you, many of all of you in the room. I'm probably the youngest one, I think, in the room. Anyway, the budget was turned down, which surprised the heck out of me, because I've sat through all 16 of the annual town meetings since I've been here. I'm one of the few probably who does at my age level. And I was shocked. I mean, I didn't know what to happen. I'd like to know from both of you how you feel about that and hear your comments on it and what the actual message from the people to you was on that, because I know pretty clear what the message was in my mind, but I don't think it's clear I don't think I've heard the answer from both of you.
Let's see. Go, Tom.
I think the message was that people are very unhappy about how things were going, and whether that had to do with the budget, with asking for more money in free cash than people thought was appropriate, or Main Street, and I felt it myself when initially that first meeting, I think the average tax bill was going up by $500 a year. I felt myself growing a little bit. So I think that there's unhappiness in the town, and I think that, I think that the tax rate and the tax levy, the amount that the townspeople pay, is we're capping out, unless we go through a vibrant town meeting member process, education process, and get people to buy in for whatever it is we're asking the raise for. But I do wonder, having gone through that meeting, are just people getting tapped out? If in 13 years the amount we pay has gone up by a nearly 100%, I don't think most people's pay has gone up 100% in that time. So where's the money coming from? You're cutting out other things of your personal budget. You're putting it on credit cards. You're taking home equity loans, or you're fortunate enough to be able to have to pay that bill, and it's not an issue for you. And I don't have a real good feel for the town. In a way, when I grew up, it was a middle-class town, and in a way, it is a middle-class town. I think there's people of means here, but I think there's people who really balance their checkbook to the penny every week, and especially with high fuel bills, long commutes, you can tack on a few other things. It's important that we honor that, and how much further can we push it? So I think it's taxes. I think it was the lack of transparency on a couple of issues. The Main Street thing plus the dispatchers. Maybe it is a good decision, but I think town meeting has to know, and town meeting has to buy into it, and it has to be explained why it's a good decision. You can't just by fiat do it. And that is why compliance with Chapter 40 is so important, because there's fairness, and there's justice, and there's transparency in it. And if you don't do that, you get the spring 2015 town meeting.
All right.
I get to
Oh,
answer.
yes, right.
To me, the message was poor communications. I did not interpret the voting to have anything to do with the high tax rate. What I saw was that the meeting had lost confidence in the selectmen because of the confluence of the discussions around 117 and the disconnect between advisory and selectmen over the amount of free cash. And I think that that's really what drove it. There was some criticism that they didn't actually make any cuts in the time between the first town meeting and the second town meeting. Personally, I didn't have any problem with that because I didn't think that that was the problem. I don't believe that the voters that rejected the budget were concerned about any specific line item or group of line items, either in the school budget or particularly since in the second town meeting they didn't have any choice about the school. I don't think that the issue was specific line items within it. I think it was a distrust in the overall handling of the process by the officials, and that what they really need to do is to improve that process. So that was the message that I got.
Okay. All right, well, we've already gone over 25 minutes. I'm going to give you each your chance to give a short closing statement. And I believe Ken was going to go last. So, Tom, you're going last.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this discussion and appreciate all the interest in the answers. What I want to emphasize, I guess, in my closing is the importance of collaboration. What I have found in my years working on as a selectman is that they need to work collaboratively with other boards. They need to work with the public, and they need to work with each other to resolve issues in the best interest of the town. I've always done that by listening to all sides of things and then carrying out the will of the voters. Kate Hogan wrote me a letter after I retired in 2010 in which she said, Ken knows Bolton, and watching him lead by listening was a powerful lesson in effective government. That's what I've tried to do. In fact, also related to that, in his remarks at the reception, Chief Alfano said that sometimes I was listening so intently that he thought I was asleep. And I've been known to do that, but I don't think I ever did that in a selectmen's meeting. But I have a history and reputation for reasoned deliberation and open communications and coordination, and that's what I would continue to do. And that's really all that I would want to do. I have no other agenda except to improve the working relationships with all those groups within the board, with other boards, and with the public. And by doing that, I think we can restore the confidence of or I won't say restore, but improve the confidence of the voters in the town government.
Tom?
So thank you for listening and for the questions, even the tough ones. I want this job. I want to serve as selectman. I want to be elected selectman, and I think it's a good thing to have someone who's as experienced as I am, which I am. I've been a lawyer for 21 years. I've ran a nonprofit on a volunteer basis for about the same period of time. I have extensive experience crafting legislation and budgets on the state level. I would like to bring those tools and my interest in government and my interest in the town to the Board of Selectmen. I think that as a town, in many ways, we're at a fork in the road. We're $22 million budget, 5,000 people. It's a lot of money, and it's not a small town anymore. I think it would be good to get new people involved. I think it would be good to go in a new direction and certainly respect the town meeting, which I don't feel has been done, that would be first on my agenda, to promote transparency, to make sure that people are getting the information if they're watching that meeting, if they're watching the Board of Selectmen's meeting. Are you understanding why that decision was made? And we can tick off the 5 major things that have occurred this year. That is not going on now. And the town cannot progress, and the budget can't be managed properly, and the public infrastructure can't be supported, and the elderly can't be supported, in my opinion, if people don't trust the Board of Selectmen. And I think to have a new, fresh voice there would be great. I hope it's me, but if it isn't, I hope it's in May. I think I went to the 5K for the town center on a week ago Saturday. We're a young we're a young, vibrant town with a lot to offer. The citizens have a lot to offer, and I would like to be a spokesperson for them in that seat. So I hope you vote for me. I'm certainly committed to civility and to communicating and working with people, but the number one thing, if you don't have transparency and information, and you're paying the bill, the tax bill, it doesn't work out, and I'll be there for you, so I hope you vote for me.
All right, well, Ken, Tom, thank you so much for this great discussion. Thanks to all of you for staying with it and for your great questions. And just one last reminder to those in the room and those who are watching this who have made it through 90 minutes of good discussion to this point, don't forget to vote on November 2nd. Right. This is not a
That's right,
normal
it's a
state
town
election.
election.
Then polls open at noon and they're there until 8.